Before me in the east Nephthys, behind me in the west Isis, on my right hand in the south is Seth, and on my left hand in the north is Horus. For about me shines the body of Nuit, and below me extends the ground of Geb, and in the centre abideth the great hidden God. So there are three parts to what I'm going to talk to you about now. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about Crowley and what happened after Crowley. Second, I'm going to talk about Typhonians in the past. And third, I'm going to talk about the magic of future selves. So just to get us going, assume then that the word Typhonian in the title, it means the magic of Aleister Crowley. More especially the magic of the ancient god Seth, or Set if you like, god of intoxication, chaos and confusion. We will gradually unravel some of his mysteries as the talk unfolds. As is perhaps well known amongst those here gathered, followers of Crowley, including the OTO, claim to have a secret, and that's a secret capable of realizing the world-old dream of the brotherhood of man. And in general, the secret is connected with an unknown or hidden god and the mysteries of a sexual nature. No one has the complete version of the secret. I've discussed this with various representatives of surviving magical orders, and the fact is that it's still a discussion. Tells you something. Okay, so first of all, let's talk a little bit about Crowley after Crowley. Crowley died in 1947. I thought I'd better mention that, as some people are still convinced that he's still alive. Even so, there are many amongst us, myself included, whose heart leaps when they hear his name. So, leap away. Now I'm going to avoid or bracket out the knotty argument as to who is the rightful successor to Crowley's mantle. There are maybe half a dozen organisations that have staked a claim so far, and naturally enough they all have some validity. But because this talk is about Typhonian magic, it's difficult to avoid the works of Kenneth Grant. Grant's work is valued beyond the narrow confines of his now tiny faction of the OTO. For example, the SOTO, Societas, Order Templi Orientis, is one of the stronger claimants to the crown, but nevertheless still seems to value Kenneth Grant's work more highly than their own founder. Their founder was Magill Motta. Now, Kenneth Grant was born in 1925, and he first encountered Crowley through a copy of Magick in Theory and Practice that he bought at the Atlantis bookshop in London. He was just 15 at the time, and by his own account his main interest was Eastern mysticism. The graphic artist Alan Moore describes Kenneth Grant at the time as a schoolboy gone berserk on brimstone aftershave. Give you that one again. A schoolboy gone berserk on brimstone aftershave. He later wrote to Crowley, as Kenneth Grant later wrote to Crowley, becoming his unpaid secretary, working principal on one of Crowley's final books called Magick Without Tears. Now, Crowley apparently wanted to groom Kenneth Grant as a possible future leader for the Thelemic movement. But Crowley was a very, very demanding teacher, and Kenneth Grant was a very difficult student. For example, Crowley wrote to Kenneth Grant telling him he really must put a sock in it if he wants to work with the order. And later, there is a terrible defect in your outlook on life. You cannot be content with the simplicity of reality and fact. You have to go off into a pipe dream. Again, that was Aleister Crowley to Kenneth Grant, quoted by Alan Moore, and it's apparently in the collection of letters that stands as Grant's 1991 biography, although to be honest I couldn't find it when I looked. So if anybody's got any clues on that, that'd be handy. Kenneth Grant did eventually become one of the most prominent of Crowley's successors, which proves the old maxim, if you want to succeed, you have to succeed. You have to work that out for yourself. His prominence is in part due to his writing, really, his books on occult topics, starting quite early on in the 1960s with a thing called the Carfax Monographs. Then he wrote a series of articles on Eastern gurus for a very innovative publication called Man, Myth and Magic. And then in 1973, Within the first few pages of that book, The Magical Revival, Grant offers us one of the earliest definitions of what a Typhonian is. So I'll quote him here. The magical tradition, which included sex as a means of spiritual attainment, existed long before the dynastic times in ancient Egypt, and there are early references to it in the sacred writings of India and China. In Egypt, this tradition was known as the Draconian or Typhonian cult. It was the first systematized form of early African mysteries. The doctrines which the Egyptians elaborated into a highly specialized cult flowered later into the tantras of India, China, Mongolia and Tibet. But it would be wrong to suppose that Kenneth Grant coined the term Typhonian. Crowley mentions the Typhon often in his works, beginning in 1907 with a book called Liber 231. This is one of the so-called holy books, and just about his earliest commentary on the tarot. Okay, if we look at the sequence of the design of the tarot trump, the Wheel of Fortune, we start with the earliest image, from the Marseille tarot. Marseille deck, so-called, which is French, but is based on 15th century Italian themes. Next you've got the card produced by someone called ETL, or the ETL deck, which is Alietta is another one backwards, which was produced, should remind you, to orientate you in this, the French Revolution. It was in 1789. So the ETL deck is about a year after the French Revolution. And it's pretty much the same, and probably based on the deck of Oswald Worth, which is also 1889. I've got a picture of one of those. Next we come to the Tarot of the Bohemians, which again was almost 100 years later in 1889. And now in this deck we can sort of see the Typhon starting to appear in the decks, and what's happened in between, of course, is the French Revolution in 1789, then the Reign of Terror, the rise of Napoleon, re-emergence of imperial aims, and the conquest of Egypt. And that's the beginning of what you would call Egyptomania. So it becomes clear that even though the Oswald Worth deck claims to be a kind of Egyptian-based tarot, in fact there's very little Egyptian imagery in it. Whereas if you go to Papus and the Tarot of the Bohemians, there's a lot more Egyptian imagery creeping into the card deck, including the Typhon of 1889. The next important step is the most important deck produced by the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the so-called Coleman-Smith deck of 1910. And in fact, if you look at the Wheel of Fortune in this deck, then in some ways it's completely lost the association with Egypt, and it's gone back in a way to the sort of medieval demon tradition. So if you really look at the cards, the Typhon is there from the Oswald Worth Tarot, the Coleman-Smith Wheel returns to its more medieval vision, and the Typhon is fully restored in the Aleister Crowley deck. So the Typhon is something that has been seeping into occult consciousness for the last 200 years now, the process initiated by the rediscovery of ancient Egypt and Egyptomania.